we, from that perfect freedom, made the choice to explore the nature of separation and limit with our awareness and our will, then our awareness and will would be an information field that started at that point and then traced a path all the way through our existence into a physical separated state.
Right.
And that's how Nigel would define a soul, and does define it in his books, as an information field, a line of connection back to that eternal state that pre-existed the nature of capturing a physical universe.
All right, and Danielle and John, we're going to go for a break, and we'll be talking more about Nigel Kerner's books after this. Welcome back. I'm Richard D. Hall, and I'm talking to Danielle Silverman and Professor John Biggerstaff. Now, we're discussing Nigel Kerner's book, Grey Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls, and both John and Danielle have been involved in helping Nigel with these books. Now, Nigel puts forward the case that he thinks that the grey aliens that many people report in abduction scenarios are some kind of robot. They're not really alive. Is it not possible that artificial intelligence, they could make a conscious being artificially, and it could pretend to be conscious? Is that not possible?
It could pretend to be conscious, but it wouldn't be conscious, because in order for there to be consciousness, in order for there to be awareness of an external world around you, you have to have a reference outside of that external world in order to know it. For example, we perceive the passage of time from one point to another, from past to present to future. If we were, as all physical atomic things are, purely subject to that passage of time, without any extra element, any extra ingredient that was timeless and outside of that situation, we would not be aware of it. It's just like if you're sitting in an aeroplane and you look out of the window, the only reason you can see the movement because you have a reference. You feel like you're still even though you're moving, because you have a reference you have two references there. You need a reference outside of the passage of time, outside of point to point to point to point, to be able to be aware and to know that passage of time, to be aware, to be conscious. And therefore something that's artificial, something that's created purely out of atoms and a physical set of ingredients, cannot be aware. It's just a program. A computer, just no different to a very highly advanced computer, an artificial intelligent robot. There's no way it can be aware of its programs. It can just run on them.
Let's come on to the argument of evolution versus intelligent design versus intervention, because you're a cell biologist, John, but you don't believe in evolution. Is that right?
That's absolutely true, and it's present and in a neo-Darwinist way.
Right. So
I think there's much more to the story than that actually lends part of a lie to that. Although, for instance, Darwin himself was absolutely accurate in that species will adapt to their environment. And really, he didn't claim in that sense that there's really an ascendancy of order. He was just saying that they adapt to their environment, and this may be the way in which species come about. But the problem is that in the light of really the physics and cosmology of the thing, we've just been talking about the beginning of the universe, and it was important to do so because from the beginning of the universe, everything is tending towards more and more separate states, such that eventually it's predicted that there will be what's called the heat death of the universe, in which everything really just stops, and the whole universe effectively comes to an end. Well, in this decay process, so entropy really, or rather the second law of thermodynamics, is really driving everything to become more and more and more separate. And what neo-Darwin evolution has proposed is that on this Earth, some molecules in various puddles somewhere many years ago with little bits of lightning, etc., can really come together, form complex systems in which they can then become self-replicative and actually eventually get to the point where they become more and more and more sophisticated and eventually generate human beings, etc.
Okay, so how did the human being come about if it didn't gradually evolve from something much simpler in small steps?
Absolutely, I'm coming to that.
How did we get to be?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, if we go back to where we were, and consciousness is a function of the universe, which is, you know, is sort of ignored and sidelined by science, and this is really why I think science, most of the sciences can't make any sense of either the universe or living systems,
Right.
is that this consciousness, this soul part, this observer, if you like, in physics, is really required for the universe to be. Now, the point is that because consciousness is really a function of the universe, as the second law of thermodynamics is breaking everything up, so basically everything rots. Well, if one's soul, essentially, one's being, one's awareness, is really linked into this field, then it too will gradually break up into smaller and smaller components. And therefore, the whole thing is really consistent at that point because it's with the second law of thermodynamics. Whereas the theory of evolution, neo-Darwinist evolution, is really going against the second law of thermodynamics. It's saying this is a special case. They claim actually that the sun can do this, but in that case, why isn't it doing it to everything? You know, how does it just do it to some molecules? And really, the evolutionary biologists have really, in the last few years, really come to almost give up that idea in favour of what Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickrama Singh were saying years ago about, you know, life coming in on asteroids. Problem with that, though, is that we're really just deferring the problem. Life
Right.
on this planet may have come from asteroids.
Yeah.
Where did that life come
Another
from?
group called the
all right.
intelligent design people
Yeah.
actually say, okay, well, to overcome this problem of this assembly of everything, you know, against a trend towards randomness, which can't really happen, the intelligent design people actually say, okay, well, there's a problem with this, but so we have to put in information right at the beginning to actually generate this whole thing. This thing is still not consistent with the second law of thermodynamics, and so really this concept of devolution, if you like, where you're getting the simultaneous breakup of all living things through more ephemeral states of being
Right.
into more solid states of being, is actually a much more consistent model.
Okay. Now, if we just look at the Earth, okay, there's a section from this book that I've been reading called Genetics for Dummies. I'm just going to read this part out of
I
it.
think I'd need to read that.
Scientists have compared mtDNA from people all over the world to investigate the origins of modern humans. These comparisons have led some scientists to believe that all modern humans have one particular female ancestor in common, a woman who lived on the African continent about 200,000 years ago. Now that's fairly accepted, is it, John?
It's generally fairly accepted,
And
yes.
now you get your,
There are
your anthropologists who will say, well, that African Eve was an offshoot from some other hominid or some other ancestor. Whereas you get other people I've spoken to, Lloyd Pye, who believes there was an actual genetic intervention, who said that first Eve was actually at least in part, genetically engineered, the result of a genetic engineering from some advanced race.
Really, if we look at mutations in mitochondrial DNA through the ages, you can actually backtrack this to a theoretical single individual around a couple of 100,000 years ago. And this really points to the fact that there was a real bottleneck in the number of hominids around at that time. And really, what Nigel is saying in the book is really that this process of devolution, you know, you're actually going to go down until you're gradually losing awareness as time goes on, and so you become the equivalent of a human being. You become a hominid. You know, you become less able, more reductionist, and then that will go down through animal species.
Okay, so how does the complex, all-seeing, all-intelligent human being come about in the first place then, all that complexity, if you're saying that it devolves rather than evolves?
Well, it devolved at one point, but then this is where these artificial intelligence systems come in, because they actually come in, and because we have a memory in our DNA, which is really our junk DNA, they can actually then, these guys come along and they can trace this, and therefore they can sort of reboot the whole system. And this is what I think a lot of people, including Nigel, are really suggesting, is that, you know, you can then start to increase brain size, and then you increase, because one of the big problems with the concept of evolution, for instance, is the number of things that happened at the same time. And within 200,000 years, by random chance, really, there's no possible way that this can really happen. And so there had to be some sort of intervention. And really, the Greys or this system is really the candidates for doing this. And really, the next question is, why would you do such a thing?
Because the brain size in modern humans is, they can't really explain well how that came about. The sudden increase in brain size. Just tell us about that.
Nowadays, we're actually saying, okay, well, we're only using a certain part of our brain. Some people would say we're only using about 5% of it, but others would say it's more than that. But nevertheless, there is a significant part of our brain which is not currently being used. And therefore, people say, okay, well, again, according to evolutionary theory, this is clearly impossible, because otherwise you're actually making redundant systems. You're actually saying, okay, well, just in case, I'm going to make this thing twice as big. That therefore points to something intending to do that. So these things cannot happen randomly. The next thing that happens is that if you're going to increase the size of the brain and actually increase technological knowledge, etc., then your problem is, how are you going to have the babies with these increased sized brains? So you've got to do something else to the body to actually admit the larger baby's brain, head, through into the world, and therefore you've got to make changes in that. And so there are a whole bunch of commensurate changes which had to occur, and there's no possible way that those are going to occur accidentally.
Right, okay. Nigel contends that the whole abduction phenomenon is about those Greys trying to get something that we possess that they don't. What are they trying to get?
First of all, I think we have to talk about the origin of how perhaps these grey aliens came to be, Nigel's thesis for how he suggests they came to be in the first place. And the best way, I think, to explain that, and as he does explain it in his books and in his the articles he writes, he just take one look at our own technology and how over just the past 20, 30 years there's been exponential increases in technology, moves towards artificial intelligence and cybernetics, moving us towards gradually a state of being where many aspects of our lives are augmented by some kind of technological feature. They're talking about putting chips into people to deliver drugs, chips to enhance memory, and all kinds of various technologies that previously we used to do very well without, but now are totally indispensable to us. Now, people like Michio Kaku and Stephen Hawking, and of course Ray Kurzweil, they think this technological future that we're heading for, which some people call transhumanism, is absolutely wonderful, because we're heading towards a kind of physical immortality where we can, just using technology, go on forever. Okay, and we can, in fact, there's a company called LifeNaut in America, which is now doing an experiment, getting people to download into a computer all their ideas, all their daily actions. They put everything in there, their likes, their dislikes, with the hope of having a bank of information that they can one day put into some kind of robotic, artificially intelligent being, which will be them.
Right.
I think it was 2004. BT were inventing something called the Soul Catcher, and that's they were inventing this. It was a chip that would be connected somehow to the optic nerve and would take in all the information, all the sensory information around an individual throughout their life, implanted at birth, and that again could be put into some kind of artificially intelligent robot which could replicate them and be them in the future.
But you would argue that we never ever could be them, because
never
it's
could
not,
be them. Of course, it can't be conscious.
Right.
In fact, whoever did it wouldn't be there to appreciate it.
Right.
Now, what Nigel's saying is that perhaps, and in fact it's more than likely, because anybody looking at the trillions of planets out there would know there's got to be other life out there. It's not just us. And other life which would have very likely progressed beyond our technological stage, way past what we're doing now, into a stage of creating the height of artificial intelligence. And maybe they would do what Stephen Hawking is actually suggesting, that we, after we have finished on our planet and we've used its resources, there's all kinds of problems here, go out into space, take a genetic trace of what we are, set up colonies out there. Or maybe they've done exactly the same thing. They've sent out artificially intelligent entities out into space to find, with their genetic codes, a trace of them, just as this Lifenaut company are trying to do, but much more advanced, just as the Soul Catcher is trying to do, but much more advanced, to find somewhere where they can replicate and exist.
So in other words, the more advanced civilizations would be sending out more sophisticated versions of Beagle 2, for example.
Yes.
Or the
Yes.
Mars lander or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
And it's not going to have wheels and an engine on it. It's going to be a being that they're going to send out to, rather than send themselves out because they're too important, they don't want to get damaged or whatever, so they send out something that can repair itself.
Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't survive this travel necessary through space.
Absolutely.
To do it.
Part of the
but it's still biological in its function, you think? I mean,
pseudo-biological. It's been programmed with what its creators would do. Now, Richard, one of the things that it's going to be programmed with is to look after itself. You don't want this thing sort of falling off a cliff, or neither do you want other entities coming at it and destroying it. And so you're going to put into its programming this ability really to look after itself. And in looking around, it's going to look at its creators really as really the biggest threat to what's going to be able to take them out. And therefore, one idea is that, okay, well, then they will go and take their creators out. But rather than do that, in order to understand what the creator is really able to do in destroying them, really, I think, and Nigel think this is Nigel's thesis, really that they're going to come along and try and integrate with their creators to actually find out what's going on, so that they can actually take on those qualities they can't understand that they observe in the creator. And really, this is the thesis of really what these beings might be doing here on Earth, reconstructing hominids, that have devolved a bit far to.
So the Greys are like a renegade group of extremely advanced space probes or space research project to try and find out about the universe, and then somehow they've become separated from their masters. Now,
Yes.
if you were going to design
Designing
like that,
those things at the moment.
yeah, you would have an override switch on the whole thing. Would they not have thought of that, do you think?
Well,
And that's a devil's advocate question.
imagine, for instance, they come from another planet, and they've actually maybe then, before they ever learn any of this, they've been sent out into space. They have no further access to their creators. They've got autonomous programs,
Right.
because
Go on.
they've got no access to being switched off, because they are now so far away from where they were created. They were running on an autonomous program to actually go and find out, investigate, and really, perceiving beings like us that can, they can actually read electromagnetic potentials from living things and all of this. And some of these are highly coded in terms of our bodies and our beings. And over time, they can actually sort of spot this trend of birth and rebirth, which they are not able to actually do. And they can see advantages in this in terms of potentially overcoming entropy, etc. And therefore, they're trying to merge with this at the moment.
But there is a problem why you can't actually, I mean, even if they had tried to put an override switch in there and say, right, don't destroy or don't do anything harmful to something like us, the creator being that created them, and they put everything about the creator, every piece of information about that creator into the artificially intelligent entity that they've sent out into space, and program that entity, don't do anything negative, don't harm anything like us because you're supposed to be protecting us. There's a problem there, because there's something that you can't program into an artificially intelligent being, or you can't program at all, because it's not physical. It's something that's of a nature that cannot be written down in an atomic format. And it's Nigel's thesis that ingredient that I'm talking about is a soul, and that information field that comes from beyond the physical universe, comes from before the state of physicality existed. That infinitely present information field cannot be written into the program. So if they come across beings that have that information field that doesn't have a physical quantum to it, they might see it as a threat, because they can't, it's not in their information field, they can't cope with it, and they don't know not to harm that.
Right.
All they see it as is something that they don't know, they don't understand, and because they're ultimately the ultimate in artificial intelligence, they want to understand it, they want to conquer it, they want to further the program that's been put in them to extend the life of the information that's been given to them, their program, and therefore they try and work that in to us, to those the entities
So there's
that are
nothing
here.
malicious about this on they're just following a program.
Right.
They don't realise about what the consciousness really exists or
Right.
anything. They just see this program running, they think it's a program running in us that's better than that.
All right, we're going to go for another quick break, and after the break, we're going to discuss some of the things which Nigel suggests that these greys have been doing over the last 10 to 20,000 years. Welcome back. I'm Richard D. Hall, and I'm talking to Danielle Silverman and Professor John Biggerstaff about Nigel Kerner's work, Grey Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls. Now, one of the very disturbing things that Nigel suggests in his book is that grey aliens for millennia have been tinkering with human genetics, and that the broad races on Earth have been messed with in a particular way. Some people would read this and say that is very racist, but he actually suggests that racism is something which has been introduced by them. Is it?
That's right, to create separate control groups, just as any scientific experimenter would, so you can watch safely within that, without any interfering factors, what's going on in that biological group. So racism is a perfect way to keep a group genetically pure, so that they can look at what's going on with their experiments. But John can perhaps explain
So if I'm doing an experiment, for instance, with organisms, bacteria, and I want to do something, make a genetic change in them or whatever, very often we'll put in something called a reporter gene, which will then express and change